I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar series of the Cybersecurity and Information Systems Information Analysis Center, or CSIAC. Today's presentation is entitled Managing Transformational Projects in a Military Setting. My name is Steve Warzala. I am the CSIAC Outreach Manager. A few administrative notes before we begin today's presentation. First, all of the phones have been muted except for the presenters. Questions may be asked at any time during the presentation by utilizing the chat function. Time permitting, your questions will be answered at the end of the session. Today's briefing slides will be posted on our website within a few days. And finally, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, the Defense Technical Information Center, DTIC. The funding that DTIC provides enables CSIAC to conduct these webinars. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Ms. Karen Miller. After starting her career as a Marine Corps communications officer, Karen became a project manager working on a variety of information technology and telecommunications infrastructure projects. With 10 years of project management experience, her projects have included process and application development in North Carolina, expansion and maintenance of telecommunications infrastructure in Guam and Hawaii, along with cybersecurity improvements in Texas. Karen now leads the Miller Professional Group in Austin, Texas. Her education includes undergraduate and graduate degrees in information systems and information technology from Carnegie Mellon University. Karen has obtained the Project Management Professional Certification from PMI, as well as the Certified Information Systems Security Professional from ISC2. I will now turn the presentation over to Ms. Miller. Good afternoon, Karen. The ball is yours.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Can you hear me just fine?
Hear you loud and clear.
Great. I'd like to open by sharing why I'm here to talk to you today. I've been managing transformational projects in the military for only a little while now compared to some of you, actually, and I'm ready to share what I've learned. So we've already seen that. Before we start, I'd like to share an idea of the spread we have in the audience. You answered some registration questions when you signed up, and from that data, I've highlighted those answers that the majority of respondents gave. So almost half of you have had no association with the military, or you're an off-site contractor who may or may not have had any association with the military. So I've made an effort to make sure that we don't lose any of you during the presentation. In line with that, we have a wide spread of experience in military project management, with a significant portion of you answering never. So to those that have answered never and none, I will say this. I'm not going to give you a lot of military philosophy, terminology, or cultural information during this brief. Every branch of service, every discipline, and every unit is different. So my recommendation is to do an internet search for the publications that your customer uses. Every service has the majority of their publications publicly published online for you. So if you have trouble understanding where your military customer is coming from, or even the retired master chief in the next cubicle, I recommend tracking down the pubs that match their background. And each service has a publication numbered 1 or something similar that discusses the ethos of their service. For example, in the Marine Corps, we have Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 1, Warfighting. It's excellent, it's aspirational, and it absolutely shapes the way I and every other good Marine Corps officer sees the world. So with that, time to share what I've learned. So transformational projects are complex, they're multifaceted, they're unique. So there's no way to teach you everything you need to know in an hour, but I am going to drop a few nuggets you can bring back to your workplace, and these nuggets are: act like a general, engage military power and influence, and finally use commitment, accountability, and escalation. The thing is, most of these transformational projects happen in matrixed organizations that don't have dedicated project teams. The military in particular doesn't generally organize around projects. The military usually instead organizes around a particular function. That means the project manager is usually borrowing other people's employees and service members to get the job done, and that creates an extra level of challenge when you're working in an organization as hierarchical as the military. So throughout our discussion, I'll talk about strategies to be successful despite the possibility that your team members all work for other officers. And then we'll close with a short discussion of what you can do with this information in a few minutes of questions and answers. With that, we'll launch into our first nugget. Act like a general. As you could probably tell from the last slide, I'm an advocate of a lot of observation. Hopefully many of you have heard of the OODA loop. OODA is an acronym for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. It's awfully hard to do the right thing without first observing the situation. So I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity, to observe your nearest respected general officers to see how they interact with their staffs. You'll notice that the good generals spend far more time listening and observing than they do talking or acting. And you'll also notice that when they do speak, it's usually short and well-timed. It's often the last thing said in the discussion, but even if it's not, it's usually sticky. It's memorable. This is partially because it's short. We have a hard time remembering a long discussion, but we can remember the succinct conclusion. So you'll be far more productive and respected as a project manager if you can provide that succinct conclusion. You don't need to dominate the conversation. You just need to guide it and summarize it. The next bullet is a little tougher to put your thumb on. They are usually compassionate and unemotional. But the idea is this. On one hand, you need to recognize and support the folks you're working with as human beings. You need to be compassionate about their situation in order to create a positive working relationship. At the same time, you have to remain unemotional about the project because this is, after all, work, and you do have to be the neutral party to effectively keep the entire project and all the stakeholders headed in the same direction. All right, so if you only remember one thing from this slide, remember this. You can't and shouldn't micromanage people. You should empower them to act independently within your team. That means they'll be doing a lot of work and making a lot of decisions without your direct input. A good general, for example, can't be there to help every private make the right decision. However, he or she can instill in his units an idea of what he wants. Really, that general doesn't personally accomplish anything at all. You as a project manager probably won't create the end work product, but you can create the mental environment in which other people get work done. So what do they think that you want? Have you clearly expressed the objectives of the project so that they will make quality decisions on their own? Your team members are making micro decisions constantly. So you need to set the conditions to help them make good ones. All right, let's launch into some storytelling. So this is a picture of telegraph cable somewhere around the 1950s. It's clearly old. And there's still some cable hung at about that time that's still out in Hawaii providing services to customers. All right, I'm out there in Hawaii taking care of this cable, and there's a lot of reasons this cable needed to be pulled out and replaced. The cables are lead lined and paper insulated. They fell down a lot. Many of the strands were unusable. However, no one could agree on how to fix the problem. Getting it pulled down and replaced by new stuff that would work better was, quote unquote, an impossible project. And the most impossible problems and projects, they're impossible because they've been that way for a long time. If you're a project manager for an impossible project, then likely you have a lot of history to work through. These cables had changed ownership over the years as the rules had changed and companies changed, merged, and split. A lot of folks might have been able to claim ownership of the cable along the route at some point or another, so that definitely complicates things. And who pays for this major muscle movement, this major initiative? Well, everyone has a version of the story, all 50 to 70 years of it, including our legal team, facilities, both the Navy and the Marine Corps, the telephone companies, contracting, the controller, higher headquarters, and us. We're just trying to get services to our Marines. But I, as the project manager, needed to understand that all of these perspectives before I could effectively move forward toward a solution that wouldn't involve full-stop litigation. I had to listen and understand the situation from all these perspectives. Here's the deal. I didn't take down a single strand of old copper cable. Other people did that. All I did was create the common vision and narrative for all of these stakeholders to take back to their organizations in order to create the common goal, the common will to get the work done. All I did was bring people together to accomplish teamwork. Without that, this project could have been stuck in self-interested Leo limbo indefinitely. And hopefully your projects aren't that dependent on the goodwill of all your stakeholders, but the truth is their investment in your project, created by your ability to listen to their needs, makes everything go so much more smoothly. So once I understand what motivates someone, I can appeal to that motivation when I explain what they need to do. But people do change, people grow, and people learn. So you can't assume that because you had someone figured out last month that they'll have the same motivation this month. So I'm back in Hawaii, and I've got hundreds of miles of cable on the ground laid over the course of 100 years. And I don't really know where any of it is because, well, they didn't have GPS 100 years ago. I have a decent idea where it's located, and of course we can go out and mark it with flags or paint whenever we need to, but that's different from having it at your fingertips in a modern GIS database back in your office where you can do your designs. GIS, basically a geolocated map. So my next story is about the GIS manager. And his stance on our project, it changed slowly and subtly, and I had to listen closely for it. So while everyone else was telling me he'd be a major roadblock, I heard small positive changes in the way our conversations went. A little cultural nugget. For those of you newer to government workers tend to have their little kingdoms. The best government workers are masters of their area. And it's great that we take ownership and do the best we can at our jobs, but that also usually means that my function doesn't necessarily interact well with your function. I know how to do my job very well, but that doesn't mean I understand or work well with your processes. And it means that if you come around and change or impact how I do business, I probably won't like you very much. Well, the GIS repository was one of those sections. I was part of communications, and the GIS system was maintained by a different section over in facilities with a different budget. So while, of course, the GIS lead agreed that having all of the telecommunications cable in the database would be a good thing, he wasn't very excited to absorb the additional workload. He also made the case that our new data could corrupt the existing data. And he wasn't very excited about letting telecommunications people who aren't facilities people into his database. Well, we led a contract. We got a team out to map and load data, and God bless the team that won the contract. They were extremely patient with the GIS lead, and we won his trust. Over time, the GIS manager's tone changed, and at that point, our approach with him could change too. We couldn't just listen to his resistance and assume the situation was a foregone conclusion. No, we had to keep listening and adapt to the change in his tone in order to get the data loaded up as painlessly as possible. And today, Hundreds of miles of geolocated cable later, Marine Corps Base Hawaii's telecommunications cable is recorded in a modern GIS database. I bet you didn't know that as a project manager, a little piece of your title also became therapist. The truth is, people like to be listened to, whether you can solve their problem or not. Expect to frequently have many other problems or questions thrown at you that have nothing to do with your project. I was recently at a conference for nonprofit mental health providers about a VPN project I was doing with the state of Texas. And I spent 90% of my time answering questions and listening to complaints about the help desk. But, that's not a problem. I listened and I took notes. Even though I couldn't do anything to help with the problems I heard, I could still establish a trust relationship. I could express to the group that I would be there to help out as much as I could. Consider it social capital, creating your network of relationships that enable your projects to function effectively. Because you never know. My new contacts and trust relationships may offhand offer information I need in the future. You never know where that missing piece of your project or your next obstacle will come from, and the more positive relationships you have, the more likely you will be able to get through it gracefully. If you don't listen, you won't learn the situation or the rules. I'm a firm believer in the idea that you must understand the rules in order to productively break them. The rules are there for a reason, but no rule can anticipate every situation. So, again, listen. But sometimes you need to take a different approach, and you need to be astute about what approach is appropriate for your situation. We had a joke in basic school where all Marine officers learn to be infantry platoon commanders, that the right answer is always, it's situationally dependent. We joked, but it's the truth. Every situation, regardless of how similar it looks on paper, is unique. No one rule will work 100% of the time. All right, so I'm a pretty small woman, and next to a lot of my Marine Corps peers, it's difficult for me to have the most commanding physical presence. But I'm not really aggressive person by nature. But that doesn't mean I can't use some strategies that allow me to create a commanding presence. So while doing projects in Hawaii, I met a gentleman who thought he could steamroll me. And whatever he said, because he said it, it must be correct, and I was going to listen to him. Well, I broke my rule, and I stopped listening. I put on some fiery anger. I talked over him in the rudest way possible and corrected his misunderstanding. Now, granted, rude, loud, and aggressive behavior isn't usually a very smart approach, but in this case, it worked wonders. On the other side of that outburst came respect. My point is this: there are no rules that always work. You and your judgment are all you really have. You need to listen to your audience. You may have to respond in a way that's a little different from your nature, but necessary for the success of your project. So find partners to help. Find a variety of partners. They can give you feedback, so you get a variety of approaches to choose from. Then pick one. All right, let's change gears a little and talk about how power and influence work. During this conversation, I'm assuming that you don't have the rank to exert positional power, but you do need to know how to utilize those who do, and you do want to obtain influence. Even though we're talking about large, complex, transformational projects, quick wins can be a very useful tool to create an immediate perception of success. Your quick wins create buy-in for the rest of the project. Think about this for a second. What have you ever accomplished all by yourself? That picture is of one of my coaches, Tessa Typhoon Simpson. Her pro record's 4-1. You've watched an MMA fight, right? There are two people out in the ring, mano a mano, right? Not so. There are coaches in her corner. There are the training partners, the sponsors, the family that took a back seat and supported her. Tessa did not do that on her own. The quality of her training partners and her coach reflect directly in her performance. You need to create that quality team that supports you throughout all the tough behind-the-scenes preparation. You need to convince them that you have what it takes to lead a successful project. You have customers. You have financiers and bosses, and they may be different people. You need to figure out who's important and who you really need on your side. When I say my boss, I could be talking about the company that hired me directly, the client we're collectively supporting. My customer could be the client, but it could also be the Texas citizen or the IT guy that has to use the tools I'm installing. This is a tough question to answer, and it deserves a look and a relook. So real quick, grab a piece of paper and a pen. I'll give you a few seconds to make a quick list of your customers. All right, in all but the most unique situations, this should be a surprisingly long list. All right, now, next to that list, write what motivates each customer. I challenge you to go check that list against reality when you get back to work. If you're close, then you're on the right track. But if not, you need to go back to step one, and you may find that it will make a significant impact. So, get your quick wins, create your corner. This will apply in any hierarchical environment. The guy in charge generally has a need to stay that way. So the more you make him look good, the more likely you are to get your ideas adopted. However, that will require you to let those ideas be his or her ideas. Also, be patient. Everyone's different, but how I usually find this goes, I'm working in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina for a retired officer who has a reputation for being pretty volatile and occasionally closed-minded. But I would casually walk in with something else to talk about and then as a side mention whatever idea I wanted to implement. So, hey, by the way, I'm thinking we should focus on doing rapid improvement events instead of application development. And then we'd move on and talk about something else. And about a week later, I'd throw it into another conversation. Yeah, so I don't have enough personnel to build that application right now, but I can get to it in a month or so. Or we could do a rapid improvement event for them now. But I wouldn't push it. Eventually, we'd be in a staff meeting, and my boss would come out with, hey, so I have this great idea. We need to be doing rapid improvement events instead of this expensive application development. And I'd sit there, and I'd say, sounds like a great idea, boss. A lot of folks have trouble with this idea, but really you get to do what you wanted to do, and you do the best for the organization. So who said the idea has to come from you? I do want to point out that I am doing what my boss directs me to do, whether I agree or not. I may try talking him into or out of a certain course of action in private, but in public and in practice, the boss's direction is what we're going to do. And really, in a military environment, you don't want to mess with that. You have to publicly support the boss or you undermine your credibility and your trust relationships. All right, making it easy to say yes. means that you have to have everything together. You must have completed staff work. I've attached some good links at the end of this presentation about staff work that I recommend you take a look at. An example, just recently I was asking a favor of the contract managers. Basically, I wasn't getting a response from some of our contracts, and since the contract manager has a lot more influence over these contracts, these folks are far more likely to listen to them rather than to me. So what did I do? I ghost wrote an email for them to send to the contractors. All they had to do was press send. Yes became easy. Here's the skinny on government red tape. The biggest problem isn't how much of it there is, although that's certainly a pain. The problem is that it keeps moving. It's like trying to play a game of whack-a-mole. The rules change repeatedly. Maybe the legislature passed a new law. Maybe someone decided to change the form they used for a request. Again, maybe someone retired and no one knows how they did it before, so they're reinventing the process from scratch. You just never know. But the bottom line is that the rules change constantly, and this is a really good reason to have robust relationships. They can tell you when changes happen and how they affect your project, hopefully before you run smack into them and delay your project. Which brings me to the next thing. Learn who all of the stakeholders are up front, and then expect more. Just as the rules keep changing and there's loads of red tape, the people affected by the rules keep changing, and the red tape has to be administered by someone. There's always someone affected that you didn't anticipate. You do your best, but expect the unexpected. So before you get totally disheartened by all this change, you do need to think about how to protect yourself and your project from coming under fire because of it. You need to keep excellent records and keep a version in an editable format. There are a couple reasons for this. First, let's say the rules about a procurement change. So last year you were able to go straight to a vendor for your software, but this year you can't. You have to go through a competitive procurement. You ought to be able to prove that you followed the rules as they were last year so you can retain your credibility. It also demonstrates that you're very detail-oriented. And that doesn't mean that you offer this information to everyone, but you do need to have it in your back pocket. Also, you'll notice that with all of this constant change, they're usually not asking for new information. They're just asking for it in a different format. Maybe this year's procurement form is different from last year's procurement form. If you have last year's in an editable format, then you can copy, paste, and get your new form out the door much more quickly than if you had to start from scratch. You remember I talked about how you as a project manager might never have actual authority over your project team members? This is the section where we talk about how to deal with that. So you first have to get the willing and sincere commitment of the team members. The setting's Iraq, the year is 2009, the location is the data center. We call ourselves the turn out the lights crew because that's what we were doing. We're turning over operations to the Army and getting the Marines out of there. Well, reading the news, that may not be exactly what happened, but that was the objective. And these kids have been doing this for a long time. Between training and deployment, they were going on 18 long, hard months. It was my role to make sure the why of what we were doing was clear without telling them how to do it. They had to be self-motivated. And that's admittedly very hard to do in that environment, and I'm afraid it'd be a whole nother talk to explain how I did it. But try this with your kids. Getting my son's room clean, right? The objective. Be able to vacuum the floor. Why? Because nobody likes cockroaches. So anytime I tell my son to clean his room or where things ought to go, it goes horribly. But if they create a specific, achievable objective, the ability to vacuum the floor, it's like magic. And it may not be done the way I want. In fact, it's never done the way I want, but it works. And you have to be okay with that. You create a better team by supporting them and their ability to do their job, even if you know how to do it better. Don't tell them how to do it. Let them make mistakes if you can, and then they can own and be proud of the resulting work. It pays you dividends in the long run. Okay, think about this. How much authority do you really have in your position right now? If you have a lot, consider yourself lucky. Use it. Most project managers are operating on social capital rather than any real consequences they can impose. For the rest of us, we're operating purely on the strength of our relationships. That means we have no authority to directly hold anyone accountable. Instead, we have a couple things to work with. First, you have the need most humans have to be helpful and useful. Most people have a desire to follow through on their commitments, which is why the last slide I talked about was about commitment. You're going to have an awful lot of trouble holding anyone accountable for their work if they haven't really committed to it to begin with. And I don't mean grudgingly agreed to do it because you badgered them and saying yes. I mean jumping on board with the goal of the project, understanding their piece and why it's important, and voluntarily committing to the work. In the military, you also have a very clear idea of who has positional power. And I do want to point out that you do need positive relationships with those people as well for many reasons, in addition to the ability to hold people accountable. All right, so for me, holding people accountable usually sounds something like this. Hi, Bob, you promised that you'd have that widget completed by Tuesday, but it's Wednesday now. What's up? Is there anything I can do to help? So, unlike Bob's boss, who can just plain direct Bob to get the work done, you need Bob to want to get the work done for you. Maybe his wife left him over the weekend. It behooves you to know that and sympathize. You're going to have to understand Bob, understand what drives him to come to work and accomplish things despite major family interruption. You'll need to frame the work in such a way that it becomes important to him. And it may be that you'll need to adjust the schedule or find a new resource while Bob works through his issues. Or you may find that simply listening, expressing your understanding can help him get through his trouble and start making progress at work. But sometimes Bob really will have an obstacle that you can help with. It's your job as a project manager, after all, to help overcome the obstacles to accomplishing the project. So back to the OODA loop. You're going to have to observe, orient, and understand your resources challenges in order to truly help. You're also going to have a thorough grasp of the rules for this next bullet point, thinking of creative alternatives. So while the military budget looks huge, I've generally worked in environments where there isn't quite enough money to go around and there's more work than there are people to do it. And this becomes a hefty constraint when some of the people I'm leaning on to work on my projects are overwhelmed with the day-to-day tasks of keeping their office functioning properly. I understand their challenge. They're overworked, and I usually can't change that, so I have to get creative. For example, we need to get statements of work out the door to our vendor for some new segments of trenching cable. Our outside plant engineer doesn't have time for that, but I do. I just don't have the knowledge. So I put myself in classes, asked them some questions, went out to job sites with them, and collected sufficient knowledge to draft those SOWs. And then I asked them to simply review those for accuracy, which is a whole lot quicker and easier than drafting them from scratch. In another case, I obtained contract support to update our maps. And another, I created a ticketing process to track our purchases, adjust the schedule to reflect reality. Once people figure out that you're open to out-of-the-box ideas to help them get their work done, they'll start coming to you with great ideas themselves, and everyone will be more productive. This last bullet point is a bit of a Hail Mary. If you get to this point, hopefully you've created a good relationship with the ranking officers. Hopefully you've kept good records of tasks, reminders, and delay. Hopefully those officers have created an expectation that their subordinates will support your project, and hopefully those officers have the spine to hold their people accountable when they don't. In fact, I'm going to repeat some of that because I've made an assumption here that perhaps I shouldn't. We talked earlier about bringing senior officers and stakeholders on board quickly, the quick wins. But here's the next thing. The smart people who work for them will always have their antenna out to what their senior officers' priorities are. A successful military person aligns their bosses to their boss's priorities. Now, there's some interpretation in there. These may be perceived priorities, believed priorities, preemptive priorities, or expressed priorities. What I mean is, some people will think one step behind their boss, and others will work one step ahead. Some bosses will tell their people what their priorities are. Other ones will only drop hints, and the bad ones are all over the place. Regardless, your project needs to be an express priority for the senior officers. If it's not, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting folks to help you. Now, the truth is, not every project can be the highest priority. So you can do a couple things to help. You can build a lot of extra time and wiggle room in your project schedule. You can recommend the project be canceled or delayed until it's a priority. You can assemble a core group that believes deeply in the project despite leadership lack of interest. Use your imagination here. In project management, I'm not sure there ever really is a right answer, just better answers. So I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier. With the assumption that you've got supporting leadership and good records, if your critical path is delayed and you're out of other options, you'll need to lean on your leadership to impose consequences, which leads us to our next slide. Escalation. The most important point here is use it sparingly. Again, I encourage you to read about completed staff work before you escalate anything, because this could easily be another course topic. I've been talking about social capital a good deal during this webinar, and this is a situation that either reinforces your networks and increases your social capital, or can destroy it and undermine your trustworthiness and credibility. So you need to handle escalation very carefully. The military tends to value independent action, leaders that act based on the direction they've been given rather than asking exactly how the task should be done. That means you gain credibility when you're capable of acting independently and handling sensitive or challenging situations independently, but that also means knowing exactly when to bring leadership into the picture. Too early, and you're seen as weak. Too late, and you're seen as slow or not proactive enough. At the same time, telling someone's boss that they aren't performing almost never makes anyone happy. In fact, here I'll add another point. Surprises are your enemy when it comes to escalation. Everyone should already know what your expectations are, or the project's expectations, really. The person not performing should already know they aren't performing. And then it's very easy and unsurprising to show where reality doesn't match the expectation. You should be in one of a couple situations. Either the entity not performing is overworked and overwhelmed. They're acting in bad faith, in which case you're asking a senior officer to hold them accountable, or the entity is smacked into an obstacle that you can't clear without the assistance of a senior officer, in which case you're asking the senior officer to clear the obstacle. You might have noticed that in most of these cases, I'm in fact trying to help the overwhelmed or roadblocked person by using an escalation strategy. I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble. If you feel like you're frequently escalating to get someone in trouble or to get something done, you may need to spend a little more time listening and understanding the situation before escalating, because this is an indicator that you haven't developed enough social capital to get your job done effectively. In other cases, you may run into something that's outside everyone's control, in which case you simply need to keep the senior officer informed. In this situation, I'd say that less is more. So I'd like to give a couple of examples of how I've used escalation. Government procurement and contracting, it's highly regulated, it's lengthy, it's complicated, there's a lot of steps and a lot of people. And any situation in which you have to align the efforts of multiple people, they're difficult. But the problem with procurement is there's too many black boxes. There's situations where few people know what really happens. So Procurement is a situation where I keep records of every email I send, follow up on every conversation with a summary email, keep meeting notes, keep copies, keep spreadsheets, all that. So there were a couple people in this process that I couldn't seem to get them to get their jobs done right or promptly. With our budget admin, the first step is I'd send an email clearly explaining what I wanted. Then I'd walk to her desk, ask her to pull up the email and ask whether what I wanted was clear. And then I'd ask her to summarize it for me, make sure she had it right. A day or two later, I'd follow up on it and get documented verification of it being done. And if it hadn't been, I'd visit her desk while it was done. So this is a case where I escalated it myself rather than via her boss, because her boss chose to never hold her accountable for decades. And so I had to solve the problem at my own level. However, with the contracting office, my strategy was different. I had the support of the boss. I quickly discovered that Steve was a slow and not very detail-oriented. So with him, I followed up regularly via email and phone and double-checked all of his work. I asked him to provide the rules that he believed he was following. And eventually I asked Steve's boss to have my contracts reassigned to different analysts. I provided all my email records and supported Steve's boss's efforts to put Steve on notice, and I didn't see Steve again. These were all examples of less than optimal situations. So what should escalation look like? In application development, there's always more to do than you have time to do. So how do you know what to do first? Well, we had multiple customers. They all outranked us and my boss, and we didn't know which to do first. This is a situation where escalation is probably smart. But I didn't just present my boss with the problem. I also provided my boss with the solution. We call it a COA, a course of action. Some military leadership, they'll want a selection of COAs to choose from. Others will just want one. But either way, never walk in with a problem that you don't have a solution to. This goes back to making yes easy. Again, really read about completed staff work before you escalate anything, and use it sparingly. So hopefully I provided you a couple of nuggets you can take back to your workplace. We did cover a lot. Along with that first bullet, act like a general, a good one. Remember to listen. Listen to everyone. Understand their perspectives. Understand their motivations. And listen for changes. Engage power and influence to the advantage of your projects. Utilize quick wins to create your corner. Work with military decision makers by making your ideas their ideas and doing good staff work. Work with red tape by keeping your stakeholders close. Expect constant change. Keep good records. Use commitment, accountability, and escalation effectively by obtaining buy-in first. Ensure you have the willing commitment of your team. Then accountability can be based on the relationship you have with your team. You're helping them get their job done. You're clearing the way for them to accomplish their work. You're not browbeating them. And use escalation sparingly. But please, before you do good staff work. Remember, you're not in this alone. No one's in this alone. Bill Gates goes to Melinda for advice. Elon Musk has Larry Page. Everyone has someone. So reach out to your peers for help. They may not be in your organization or at your level, but there is someone that has faced the same challenge you have. Reach out. Share your success stories with each other. Write them down. Read other people's stories. Reinforce what you learn on the job every day. Because continuous learning is valuable to everyone, and you may have a story that I could learn something from. So here's my contact information and the links I recommended earlier. The first one is about staff work. Thank you to CSIAC for providing this platform for all of us to continue learning. Thank you to Steve for facilitating. And thank you to the audience for sticking with us. And with that, Steve, we can move to questions and answers.
Okay. Well, thank you, Karen. That was a very, very interesting presentation. Let me take a look at some of the questions we've got coming in from our attendees. Let's see. One of the folks says you mentioned good staff work several times. You may have missed it, but could you briefly describe what that is and why it's so important?
All right, thanks. So all the folks that work directly for a general or other senior officer, they're called the general's staff. And they're the people that provide the general all the information he wants or needs to make a decision. So staff work is the work they do in order to provide that general with the right information at the right time, in the right format, because it's impossible for him to know about everything. The staff is expected to figure it all out for him. It's quite powerful, really, if you think about it, because the information the general gets definitely shapes the decisions he makes, and it can be a pretty junior officer basically shaping the general's decision. And that's why the military has definitely formed guidelines for how to do it well, and why I recommend looking into it. And I will say, the same guidelines that the military uses for completed staff work served me fantastically in the civilian sector as well, outside of the military. So, yeah, that staff work is a fantastic thing to learn about and use in your daily working life.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I thought I thought the presentation was very interesting. You hit on a lot of interesting points. There's the kind of standard project management things that get taught, but then there's a lot of the underlying human factors that come into play. Your quote of being compassionately unemotional. I thought that was interesting. Being able to detach yourself emotionally from the situation, so you can rationally look at the problem and make decisions. Folks, I think, that get kind of too invested may sometimes lose sight. So I think it's good to be able to maintain that balance, kind of maintain the calm within the storm. So you're making good decisions. So I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the generals are moving around these big chess pieces, right? But at the same time, they're dealing with people's sons and daughters. They're dealing with lives. It's pretty serious business. So they do have to be able to think on both levels, and it's a good skill to have.
Let's see. Got a couple other questions coming in. Let's see. In your experience, how open have your military bosses been to innovative ideas that are not in their traditional lane? Have they been receptive, or have you met with resistance when you've tried try some new things?
That's a great question because it's all over the map. And I mean, the truth is, I thought about including this in the presentation, but there's a lot to include. Military officers, they're all human too. And we're all different. We all bring a different approach to the table. I've had some officers over me that are perfectly happy to be cutting edge and adopt the latest thing. I've had others that don't. My answer to that is, I'm not looking at it as dealing with a military officer. I'm looking at it as dealing with another human being that brings their own perspective to the table. Back to the listening point, really. And you really can't walk into the room and assume it's going to be a certain way, because you just never know. You don't know that officer until you listen and find out where they are. on this scale, for example, as far as how open they are to innovative ideas?
Yeah, that's as I was reading the question, that was the same thing. Having listened to your presentation, it's kind of that kind of knowing your audience, or being able to read the room, take the pulse of the room, and everybody's different. Everybody has kind of different motivators, and you have to be able to try to kind of feel that out and get a sense of that. And so I think there's I think it's project management's a skill, but I think there's also, I think the really good project managers, it's also an art form, and I think they can kind of get a better sense, feeling. I guess it's kind of hard to define that, but kind of reading the room or taking the pulse of the room. So and I think maybe that's something that comes with experience over time. May not be something that you have right out of the starting gate, but I think the more you do it, I think the good project managers start to develop that skill, develop that that side of themselves.
Yeah. Nothing like experience.
And let's see, do we have any last questions for Karen? Otherwise, we're kind of coming to the end of our time here. We're getting you're getting a lot of positive feedback. I think folks were pretty pleased with the talk today, with the information you presented. I think it was very valuable, and I want to thank you, Karen, for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience with the group, and we appreciate it very much.
All right. Thank you. And if you have any additional questions after this, because I still see some coming in, you're free to email them to me, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, and we will be posting Karen's slides on our website here at the CSIAC.org, and in a couple days we'll have them up, and as well as a recording of this webinar if anybody wants to go back and check it out. And like I said, the slides will be up there. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and hope you have a great day. And we'll see you next month. Thanks. Bye-bye.